The meeting is now being recorded. I could hear someone's not muted yet. Let me just see if I can spot. No, well, we'll carry on, but please stay muted, but we can always unmute for question time. Question time, if you want to use chat and aim it to me, we'll recover that. I will try and do it via Zoom and in person in the room when we get to question time. Pippa, I was going to say, have I missed anything in terms of Zoom etiquette, do you think? Right, because I've not lost, I left my crib sheet at home. So now then, we have tonight a very, very special guest speaker, someone who has made Wilmslow her home after quite a lot of world travel, living in some interesting places. And I hope, Althea, you've not been offended by us failing to use your very hard-earned title of doctor in our marketing initiatives. It's a slip-up. We should have realised, because the intelligence does show. And we are welcoming tonight a lady who is Cambridge graduate, a PhD in astrophysics from Manchester University, and she is called Dr. Althea Wilkinson. Now, Althea, if I make you the host, will you tell us how you've involved yourself in nature and Wilmslow's food forest? So I'm going to make you host, and let's hope that works.
Right. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Excellent. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to... I'm getting an echo. Is that...
No, I saw that.
I'd like to say thank you very much to all those who've actually turned out on what's not a very nice evening. Thank you for coming, and thank you to all the rest of you for listening on Zoom, and I don't blame you for staying at home. Right, thank you indeed for coming to listen to this story about our food forest garden. I mean, I got involved with Transition Wilmslow several years ago now, largely because I've always been interested in trying to make the state of the planet better ever since I read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Some of you may have read it many, many years ago. And so the activity of Transition Wilmslow just fitted in exactly with what I wanted to be involved with. So without more ado, I think I will share the screen, hopefully share my presentation, and hopefully get it started. Okay, yes, will do. Is that okay? Yeah, okay, lovely. Right, so tonight's topic is the food forest garden. This is a joint project between Wilmslow Community Market Garden Group and the Tree and Woodland Group, both parts of Transition Wilmslow. I'm mostly going to talk about the sort of, well, I'm not actually going, I'm in between the two. So I'm going to talk about the intersection of the two. Now, what is a food forest garden, you might well be saying. If I've got any experts, by the way, in the audience, if I've got anybody who's a permaculture aficionado, I would like to say right now that I am not an expert, I'm an enthusiast. And if there are any experts, I'd love to hear from you. Please come and talk to me afterwards. But assuming that many of you are not very much involved in what a food forest garden is, I thought I'd describe a bit what it is, and also why we might think we need it at this juncture in Wilmslow's history. Well, so getting the next. Oh, there we go. So it all started from a talk we had just before the pandemic, we had a talk about Wilmslow in 2050, I think it was either 2050 or 2060, anyway, some years ahead. And it was very interesting. It was all about climate change and temperatures and water and flooding and all the other things, very interesting. But one of the things that really caught our attention, and that was particularly the Market Garden group, caught our attention, was the description of what might happen with respect to food. They were talking about shortages, and they were talking about supply chain problems, and it all seemed quite a long way away. And then a couple of months later, we were into the pandemic. And I don't know which of you actually tried to make a loaf of bread or tried to get some yeast during the pandemic at the beginning. It was very, very difficult. We were straight into these supply problems and dependence on other countries and shortages in the supermarkets. So this was a real wake-up call for me, and I'm sure it was for many other people, that as a nation, we really need to be more self-sufficient, and particularly in food and energy. So looking at the government and wondering if they were going to have time off coronavirus to think about such things, how can we take things into our own hands? And at the start, we came up with this idea. So when I say we, I mean Transition Wilmslow came up with this idea of a community market garden on 2 acres of land. That would be lovely. We've still got that idea. We're still working towards it. It's quite difficult to find 2 acres spare around Wilmslow that people will let you have. The dream, of course, would be a chain of community market gardens. This is traditional market gardens all around Wilmslow, and then you might have a hope of providing food that was not appearing in supermarkets. Just 2 acres wouldn't do it, but 2 acres would be a good start. But then we started thinking about energy and resource efficient ways of growing food. And if we start thinking about food, and looking at these 2 pictures, you might think, well, that's lovely. Beautiful wheat field there, lots of lovely crop there, and being harvested in a most efficient way by this wonderful harvester, which needs only 1 person to drive it. We don't need huge groups of people doing the harvest anymore. It looks great, it looks efficient. It is efficient. But then you look more closely at this picture, and what are you seeing? I don't know if you can see my, oh, you can see my pointer. Okay, good. In this picture, you're seeing a monoculture. You're seeing, as far as the eye can see, just one type of plant. There are no weeds, probably no biodiversity. These plants all have their roots at the same level in the soil, so they're all competing. You become vulnerable to any disease. If there's a disease that affects that plant, then it's going to go right through the whole field as far as the horizon. And this picture, the problem with these huge mechanical devices we now have for doing the harvesting is that they're very heavy. They compact the soil and they destroy the soil structure and the microorganisms. So, you know, maybe that's not quite as, maybe it's food, or is it a potential desert? Are we heading towards a new Dust Bowl? So if we look at a few food facts and what's going wrong, I've already described that it's monoculture and that we're losing biodiversity. This intensive use of fertilizers, which we're seeing is really a problem at the moment, because if they are made in places which suddenly decide they're not supplying them to us, then we've got a problem, and they're not very good for the soil anyway. The soil gets eroded. And what you come down to is that without altering our agricultural practice, our food supply is really beginning to look a bit precarious. I've seen a forecast which suggests we may only have 60 harvests left. That's a chilling number. That's in 60 years' time, we just won't be able to grow food on most of the land we're growing food on now, which is a real worry. You know, maybe not for us individually, but certainly for our children and grandchildren. And of course, the changing climate affects food growing hugely. So we need to look at diversifying. There are 20,000, more than 20,000 species of edible plants. And oddly enough, we only use on a regular basis something like 20% for most of our food. So there's a lot to go at there. So we ask ourselves, what could we do differently? And the answer, one of the answers, of course, is what does nature do? And then nature, well, you think about a woodland, you think about any wood you know, nobody goes and waters it, nobody goes and weeds it, nobody plants in it, and yet it has lush growth and lots of different plants and animals. And the soil quality is not decreasing gradually. It's maintained and improved by leaves falling. It's protected from erosion, and a lot of different plants growing there. They're growing side by side in layers, not all at the same level, and under the soil they're in different layers. So deep roots are bringing up nutrients to those that are closer to the surface, etc., etc. The canopy of trees, something that I think will have struck us all very firmly this summer, being hot, it's very nice to find some shade under trees. And the tree canopy is actually wonderful for cooling the temperature down by as much as 20 degrees. If we're going to be having temperatures of 100 degrees Fahrenheit, Fahrenheit, yes, we certainly want to be being cooled down to, say, 80 or something like that. So there are a lot of advantages to working with what nature does naturally. And forests contain lots and lots of different sorts of perennial plants, with some self-seeding annuals. And this is what you might expect a forest garden to look like. So actually in that picture, you've probably got trees that are producing fruit. Most of these herbs underneath the trees will be edible, and there'll also be other things that are edible too. So it's something that looks beautiful, feels beautiful, and yet is fruitful. But we still do need to grow food, so let's try and grow it with nature rather than fighting it. It has to be sustainable, ideally minimum work, minimum cultivation, so no dig, lots of mulch. We'd like to try different plants, and we'd like to encourage the biodiversity. And this brings me to our food forest in Wilmslow. Now, just to orient you with where we are, if you look into the depth of the picture, beyond that hedgerow right at the end of the field there is Wilmslow High School. And the bypass runs along that hedge, the place where they do the racing every, I don't know, Saturday or whenever they do it, is along the back of that hedge. The road to Prestbury is to our right, going off to our right, in this sort of direction. And we're on the land lane allotment, which is not many people know about because it's fairly well hidden.
Yeah.
So this is what the site looked like when we first came to it. We were introduced to this site by Lata, one of our councillors who's here tonight, and one of the other members of the Wilmslow Town Council, who introduced us to the site and gave us the idea that it might be a good idea to present a plan to the council at the end of 2020 to restore and manage these allotment sites that weren't being used. There are essentially, there's up to 55 allotment sites which are being used very, very fruitfully and constructively. And then at the side of them was this wild and debris strewn area which wasn't being used and which the council weren't planning to make into allotments anytime soon. So we suggested that what we'd like to do is use part of the area to create a small woodland. I don't know if any of you've heard of the phrase tiny forest. It's a trendy thing to do now, is to create a tiny forest planting lots of trees. Well, we're going to have a small woodland, which is rather the same sort of idea, as a carbon sink and increasing biodiversity and carbon storage, etc. And in the more open areas, we thought we would like to try and experiment with developing a food forest garden. So this sustainable food forest we've been talking about. And I stress that this is an experiment, it's still an experiment. So we don't absolutely guarantee the outcome. So the original garden looked like this. It's a triangular wedge. North is to the top. The area up here, the sort of triangle at the top, there are two big trees. There's a big Scotland pine, and there's a nice acer, I think, there, and one or two other acers and maples and things, and a hedgerow which has got quite a lot of ash trees in it, some of which are beginning to suffer ash dieback. This top corner here was what we designated as the area of the small woodland, and we have now planted more than 100 small native tree saplings there. The area next to it here and the area to the south is what we've designated as the area we're trying to make into the forest garden. And the area in between here is being left on its own to regenerate, just to see what happens. It's got some very nice wild damson or wild plum, something of that nature wild in the area here, which flowers and fruits. It's got quite a dip. The land isn't very level, which is another reason it's difficult to make into allotments. It's got quite a dip just to the left-hand side here, which we'll talk about later. So that's the area we had to work with. When we came to it in autumn 2020, that's what it looked like. Rather lovely, but absolutely full of brambles. And when we actually came back to it in January, March 2021, it looked like, well, basically barbed wire up to your chin, barbed wire, i.e. brambles. It was quite formidable. And there were also years of accumulation of plastic, glass, metal, carpet, you name it, it had been thrown there. Wilmslow Town Council very generously provided us with 2 skips, which we filled of stuff, as you can see in the bottom right corner there. It was quite a task getting that out. We then needed to clear the area of the embedded carpet, which people had laid down there to park over because it gets rather muddy. And we needed to try and get the bramble roots out. So fortunately, Wilmslow Town Council had very kindly given us a small grant towards this. So we used that to employ someone with a digger to come and help us just get the soil to a state where we could see the soil almost for a start. And even the woodland area was full of rubbish, as you can see at the top left there. The other problem was that it was wet. The soil must be pretty clay because this is not the highest part. This is the highest part of the site. As you can see beyond these 2 gentlemen, who you may recognize or may not, the land drops down, and yet this water wasn't draining away. So we started trying to dig some drains. They were partially successful, but not completely. And it was still pretty wet up in this top area. So how were we going to make the best of this fairly unpromising bit of land? We decided that conventional market garden wasn't really an option. And so we wanted to try and use these permaculture principles. Permaculture covers a lot more than gardening. It covers a sort of whole philosophy and a way of life. But as far as gardening and food's concerned, it's the conscious design and maintenance of agriculturally productive ecosystems, which are diverse, stable, and resilient like natural ecosystems. So that was what we decided to try. And what is a food forest garden? Well, it has 7 layers. It has a top layer, which is big fruit trees or big nut trees, something that's going to provide a canopy eventually. It then has a lower layer of smaller fruit trees, a smaller layer below that, number 3, of things like currants, blueberries, all those sort of bush plants. Below that again, you have the layer of herbaceous plants, so that's perennials and maybe some annuals. That's where you're growing your conventional food. Root crops, ground cover, which we're trying to make be wild strawberries, and climbers, which we are yet to work on to any great degree. So that's the idea, is that these are the layers we're trying to establish. To structure what we were doing, we knew we wanted to have fruit trees planted fairly close together in the forest garden. And round the fruit trees, we wanted to take this permaculture idea of what's called a fruit tree guild. All this means is it's just a bed round the fruit tree where you grow things which are beneficial to the fruit tree. So things like things that will produce mulch for you, things that will deter pests, things that will attract pollinators, things that will fix nitrogen. This is where you grow your food as well. And these things called dynamic accumulators, those are the roots which go down deep, bring their nutrients back into their leaves. You then chop the leaves and drop them as mulch around the plant to return it to the soil. So we based our design for the garden on these fruit tree guilds. So eventually, after all the clearing, we started marking out the guilds and started digging. We have had some wonderful help from volunteers, and I should at this point credit our lovely volunteers, of whom we have several in this audience. Without you, we could not be where we are today. It's far more than one or two people could cope with. But at this point, we got some help, enthusiastic help in from the scouts. There were St. John's Lindo scouts. They came in and helped us plant squashes and green manure. The squashes worked very well. The green manure didn't do quite so well, but it was lovely to have them there. I'd also like to credit the Kindling Trust. They've been brilliant. If you don't know who the Kindling Trust are, they're an outfit which has a market garden near Stockport, which was built on a tarmac which had council flowers grown on it. They imported tons and tons of soil and compost. So what they're doing is growing on a huge raised bed, and they're growing enough fruit to provide a veg box scheme and provide local restaurants food. They've done so well. They had a crowdfunding effort which has now enabled them to start up an agroforestry farm near Warrington. For this agroforestry farm, they wanted lots of fruit trees. So they got lots and lots of apple tree grafts. They got the roots and the scions, the bit you graft to the root, and they wanted help with it. So they advertised for people to learn how to do grafting, and we volunteered. So we've learned how to graft apple trees, and we brought several home with us, and plum trees as well. Eventually, they gave us 21 young grafted apples, old local varieties from an orchard in Timperley, which are lovely. Well, I'll show you their names in a minute. They've supported us with advice when we had some inadvertent rabbit pruning, and they've offered to support us with proper when we get to the stage where we need it. Now, I've said that the site was very wet. This is the top end of the site, which in the winter is waterlogged. And so we decided that we needed to raise the area to plant the fruit trees in above the standing water, because apple trees don't like their roots in standing water. So we adopted this, it's another permaculture idea called sheet mulch. So what it means is you put cardboard down, then you put a layer of compost, then a thick layer of straw, then another thick layer of well-rotted manure. Let it all settle and mature for a while, and then you're ready to plant in it. And the results this year have been fabulous. So I would recommend that to anybody as a good thing to do. And it also got the apple tree roots out of the water. Here was the first fruit tree guild without the tree. But we had a wonderful day actually, it was one of the Festival of Nature days last year. I think it was in October sometime. We had a lovely day, fruit tree planting day. And we got, again, lots of lovely volunteers, lots of children. It was a delight to see how much they were enjoying planting these apple trees. Just lovely. We got all our apple trees planted. You see, there I am with all the tree guards. We put tree guards around them because we knew we had biodiversity around. And everything was lovely. And these are the to show you where the trees were, and just to show you some of the names. There's lovely names: Egremont Russet, Lord Lambourne, 40 shillings is doing ever so well. Oh yeah, that's the walnut, and there's a pear, the winter Nellis. There's also a mulberry, which is going to take a bit longer. And then back to the apple trees, we've got Ashmead, Colonel, Duke of Devonshire, Bee Bench, Withington Welter, Lancashire Pippin, and Rake Maker. So just a lovely heritage feel there. But we call it the Hope and Heartbreak Garden. We got all these trees beautifully planted. We went away, left it for a few days, came back, and I thought we'd been subject to vandalism. We went round at half the trees. They looked like that. And I was sure somebody had come with some secateurs and snipped them off. But then I learned, no, that is what trees look like when rabbits have bitten them off. And we do have a very healthy population of rabbits. And in the winter, they just love apple wood and apple bark. So we doubled the height of the tree guards, thought these trees wouldn't come back. But actually, most of them have survived, miraculously. Moving on now to the other end of the garden, the other end of the triangle. We had the same sort of plans there, but because it's much more sloping, we didn't think we initially needed these gills, these sheet mulch gills. So we didn't build them up to start with. You can see on the right-hand side how much the land slopes down to the left. And that's the dip, which is, I'll come back to later. Thank you, Woodland Trust, for supplying us and the Scouts, again, this was 4th Wilmslow Scouts, with more than 400 native hedging whips, which we planted as hedging all the way along the left-hand side of the plot that I showed you. It has a path, it has a footpath running along the outside, and we wanted to make a nice hedge. A, for, you know, biodiversity, birds to nest in, little creatures to live in, but B, just to establish a boundary, better boundary. And you can see that goes down into the dip as well. We had some very nice instruction from Chris Widger from the National Trust and how to plant the trees. And I know at least 1 or 2 of the people in this audience helped plant the trees. Lovely, thank you. Most of these hedgerow plants have survived. Some of them didn't make it through the heat, but many of them have. So our hedgerow is still going strong. We had produce in year 1, not a lot, but we had some. And we also discovered what rabbits like and what rabbits don't. Rabbits don't like field beans, like these ones up here. No, broad beans basically, but they're slightly smaller. They don't like potatoes, they don't like squashes, rhubarb, artichokes, and as it turns out, tomatoes, surprisingly. And they also don't seem to like chard, which I would have thought they would like. But anyway, they do like parsley, chives, onions, lettuce, and apple tree bark. So we had to start doing some repairs and to deal with what we've been given. We had to replace only 1 apple tree that had been bitten off below the graft. So only 1 rabbit damaged apple tree. And we had some nice help there with replanting. 1 more has been lost to the drought this summer, but we have another one to replace it with. All the others have survived, which is almost miraculous.
Yeah.
The garden looks lovely in the spring. We scattered around some daffodil bulbs in the hope that it would look lovely and cheer us up, and it did indeed. It was really nice. And the first apple blossom too made it all the more just charming to be up there. We had to decide to trial which plants were going to survive the rabbits and which weren't. So we decided to put up some temporary fences round 5 of the gills. So we've got room inside them to plant things which might not survive. And we've tried to plant the same things in gills outside the fences just to check what lives and what doesn't. We also continue to find rubbish. You can see, well, not very well, but this is a big metal bar which Peter and Lata dug out fairly recently, actually, not very long ago. This is now moving to what the garden looks like this summer. We have a lot of comfrey and borage intentionally planted, A, because bees love it, and B, because they're these plants that you can just chop down. You can chop down, chop them into little bits, scatter them around as mulch, and then they regrow. They regrow about 3 times in a season. So they're absolutely wonderful for producing fertilizer. We built some compost heaps Clearly, we're clearing a lot of stuff that needs to go in the compost heap, and we need lots of compost that needs to come out of the compost heap. So that's nice. It's not quite as a forest would do it, but it's approximating what a forest would do when it's grown up. Of course, our forest is not grown yet, so we have to help it a little bit. The gills are looking terrific. They're looking wonderful at the moment. We've got all sorts of things growing. You can see things like Cavallonero, bottom right-hand corner here. The nasturtiums, which were planted by the beavers. The beavers wanted to come and help us, and somehow nasturtium seeds seemed a good thing for beavers to be dealing with. So we said, let's plant lots of nasturtiums, because of course they are edible. Flowers are edible, seeds are edible, and I believe the leaves are edible in salad. Somebody probably tell me. We have chard, we have lots of rhubarb, we have some kales, various kales, we have globe artichokes here. All sorts of things are growing really, really well. They've loved that sheet mulch. We also decided we wanted to try a herb garden. So we put together a pile of logs, threw some earth over it, and I honestly didn't think the herbs would survive the rabbits, but I mean, they've struggled because it's been dry, but most of them have survived. So we've still got them, and hopefully over the winter they will grow some more. That was encouraging. We still have a lot to do. We want to do more improvement of the soil, more gills. So we're going to build some more in the southern area where we didn't do them before. We're going to do this soil improvement. That's one of the first priorities. Of course, we need to do lots more planting. We need lots more perennial vegetables, kales, alliums, etc. We need more ground cover. So the wild strawberries hopefully will continue to spread themselves. We'll put in more ordinary strawberries. Things like clover and phacelia, which are all nitrogen fixers, have nice flowers. Rabbits like clover, insects and pollinators like phacelia. So they're all good things to have in. We're aiming to try not to have any bare soil at any point, because as soon as you have a bit of bare soil up there, the thistles and the nettles and everything else comes back with a vengeance.
Yeah.
We'd like to introduce some more root layer plants. We've only got Jerusalem artichokes at the moment and a few potatoes, and climbers. We're quite ambitious with our climbers. We'd like to start building some vertical structures like archways, perhaps pyramids, something for things to grow up. Possibly we might plant hops and the achoka, which I'll come back to in a minute. But what about vines, and what about kiwi fruit? We certainly know those will grow here, because we know we've seen them in a garden in Alderley Edge. Some of you who went on the Gardens Day to Peter Woolham's garden will have seen them. So let's try those. So we definitely want more borage and comfrey for the roots and the mulch. Should we be really ambitious? Climate's really changing. Should we be trying a fig and an avocado tree? Why not? This is a long-term project. For these trees, it's going to take years, probably 10 years. For the underlayers, probably at least 5 years to get really established. So it's going to require patience, and the crops are not going to be huge. You're not going to be able to walk down a row and collect, I don't know, rows and rows of onions or rows and rows of whatever else that you can do at the market gardens. You have to walk around the guilds and pick things as you find things. So it's not going to produce mass-produced vegetables, but it is going to produce some. And there are other things we'd like to do, not just in the way of these plants, but we'd like to introduce other plants. One of our aims is to show how we could diversify with foods. So we want to show not only how we can grow conventional food in a forest setting, but we like to explore different sorts of foods. I hasten to add from that picture, they're not all growing in the garden yet. These are just to illustrate some of the things we might like to try and grow. I don't know if many of you have heard of an achoka vine. It's a member of the cucumber family. It's a native of South America. It's a vigorous climber, looks like this picture here, has these lovely little spiny fruits. They're actually not spiny, they're quite soft. and they're edible. What you do, if you get them nice and green and early, you can eat them young in salads. If they're a bit older, you need to split them in half, take the seeds out, they have black seeds, and stir fry them, and they're like very mild peppers. So another food plant which we aren't used to. So that's an example of we'd like to try new and different foods. Maybe we also need to start thinking differently about some of our old friend enemies in the garden. Dandelions, of course, we spend half our lives trying to get them out of our gardens, but they're edible. The leaves can be eaten in salads with daisies. I have this wonderful book called Cooking Weeds, which seems to me like beautiful justice. You know, you spend all your life trying to dig them up and they keep growing, so why not eat them? get vengeance on them. They can be used in, so I've got so there are some interesting recipes here for things like dandelions in batter. You can cook the flowers in batter like you do courgette flowers, that sort of thing, soups. Interestingly enough, these weeds, as we call them, seem to be rather richer in vitamins and minerals than many of our cultivated plants, where we've sort of, over time, rather lost the vitamins and minerals. So that's an interesting aspect. You can use well, of course, the roots can be used for a coffee, and all of them usually have a herbal remedy connected to them as well. And with dandelions, they are an absolutely vital source of early pollen and nectar for bees. They are the very first thing that the bees can get en masse, and so they're really, really important for honeybees. There's another thing we have a lot of at the forest garden, nettles. And of course, as you know, same thing, you can cook nettles, provided you pick them with gloves on. Once they're cooked, they don't sting anymore. But you have to cook them first. And again, all sorts of things you can do with them. Yeah. And of course, the other thing you can do with nettles, they're wonderful chop and drop mulch, and they're also wonderful for making a liquid compost, as you probably know. If you put them in water, let them stew for a bit, they smell horrendous, but they're absolutely wonderful for the plants. But to come to more concrete proposals, the Scouts, fourth Wilmslow Scouts, are very keen to build us some bird boxes. Land lanes surrounded by these trees. There's no reason at all why we shouldn't have bird boxes right around the entire set of the allotments. And that would enhance the site biodiversity hugely, I'm sure. So we are about to apply for a small grant from Wilmslow Town Council to see if we can get a little bit of money to fund the materials for the boxes. And hopefully we'll be doing that this autumn, getting them all ready for the birds to discover as soon as they are feeling ready to make nests in the spring. The even more ambitious target is a wildlife pond. It would be an absolute wonderful addition to this garden to have just the increase in biodiversity that a wildlife pond would bring to it. And you remember I talked about the land sloping away. In the winter, that slope, or that bit at the bottom of the slope, fills with water. It is a pond for about 3 months of the year. It has willow trees that grow out of the middle of the pond, and of course, as soon as it becomes spring, the willow trees start sucking the water up. But there clearly is clay soil at the bottom there, so clearly it's a good thing to start with. Probably we will have to get rid of the willow trees, but maybe there's also a sense of a slight element of future-proofing the garden against possible future hosepipe bans, because the whole area up there gets very dry in the summer. And it seems like we may well be getting more hosepipe bans in the future. So, you know, if we had a little bit of a source of water there around the year round, it would be very nice. But we need advice. It's not a simple job. There's a lot of land to be cleared, a lot of the trees need to be cleared, the goat willows removed, structural decisions need to be made. There are political decisions in that the dip lies half in the allotments overseen by Wilmslow Town Council and half in the section that belongs to Cheshire East Council. So we may require approval from both councils. We need to go to the Allotment Association. We certainly need major working party or parties to do this, and we will probably need to apply for some a grant for some extra funding from there are various sources we can try applying to for grants. But if we decide we need a liner, for example, or if we decide we need a digger to help us actually clear the area, then that would require a bit more funding. So, but it's a dream, and we're going to see if we can take it forward in this coming year. So you've seen where we're going. Come with us. We're interested in making this an amenity for everybody who wants to explore what you can do to grow more in harmony with nature. And I think the time is really ripe for that. I think a lot of us are becoming much more aware that a manicured garden is perhaps rather not as fruitful as it could be in many ways. And that you know, perhaps we might want to introduce some of these ideas in our own garden. So it's an example of new ideas about agriculture. We are slightly constrained by the fact that we're on an allotment site, and of course allotmenteers don't really like lots and lots of people they don't know roaming around the allotments. We would love to find others interested in permaculture adventure. So if you are or know of anybody who is, please get them put them in touch with me. But we do love showing visitors round, and if you get in touch with me, we would be delighted to show you around. We can't just throw the gates open to everybody, unfortunately. Hopefully, eventually, some way may be found to do that, because we like this to be an amenity for the whole community, really, and we're not quite there yet. But if you'd like to see round, just have a look. Do get in touch, and if you'd like to volunteer. Yes, please. We can always use more volunteers. So come and talk to me or email me at the email that's given there. And so that's really all I want to say to you. But just to finish off, I'm going to show you a very little video clip taken by Lata, which just shows you around a little bit and gives you a bit more idea of what the garden's like. Oh, perhaps we want the sound. So we're walking up from the southern end now. We're walking past some of the fruit bushes. That's a bit of comfrey. We've put in paths. You see there are many wildflowers there. There's a bit more comfrey. We're coming up to one of the beds which has been fenced. So that's one of the gills that's been fenced. Blueberries to your left there. You can see that dip on the left. Now moving around to the right towards the little track that divides us from the other main allotments. Yes, that's looking down towards the dip. Looking towards the regeneration area now. Those are the wild plums or wild damsons. Nice bumblebee. And here is those were field beans, which have since been harvested, as one of our audience knows very well. help me pod them all. Okay, thank you. So at the end, very happy to answer questions if anybody wants to ask them.
Stuart, you're muted.
Stuart, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm trying to persuade people at home to make sure they are muted, because we are getting some unfortunate feedback. Jackie, you're looking at me at the moment, which is a sign that your microphone's picked up your movement. So if you can just find your mute button, that would help us. Well done, thank you. Right, now then, ladies and gentlemen, that's absolutely fascinating. I must say I'm quite pleased that visiting the food forest is by appointment only. I got images of going foraging for my dinner tomorrow night, but perhaps that's a little premature. We'll start, ladies and gentlemen, with questions from the audience, and I'll repeat them to those people on Zoom so they can hear, and then we'll come back and see who on Zoom. If you'd like to if you've got a question on Zoom, you put your hand up, I'll flick across my screen, and then I should be able to select, and we'll come back, and automatically I'll probably feed things straight over to Althea. So who's going to kick off? Who's a starter for one?
I was only going to say, is there the regular time slot for when people can volunteer to cook? I think that's too.
Yes, please, yes. So Lata has asked, is there going to be a regular time spot for visitors?
And the answer, now, have we got a big echo? The answer is, there is a regular time slot for volunteers, which is at the moment Saturday morning, though we might well try in the next summer to try something in an evening. Regular time slot for visitors, I hadn't thought about it. At the moment, it's more or less been by request. And obviously, if it were a lot of visitors, then it would make sense to have a regular slot. But well, let's see if all you lovely people want to come en masse, we will try and organise a time. But so far, we don't have a fixed time.
Well, certainly that's a lovely invitation. I think we could get a few at the same time. So from the front row to the back row.
That was such a lovely talk. Thank you so much. One suggestion.
I would love to do that.
So I'll repeat that just in case it wasn't heard on Zoom. The question is, can we consider the food crops that thrive in water? And we've had one or two suggestions. Althea.
Yes, lovely. And do send me your list, please. Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, if people have ideas of things that would be good to try, you know, we're very, very open to experiment.
The question is, what thought has been given to calorie and vitamin content, the nutritional values within the food that's planted?
So far, that hasn't been a top priority. I mean, what's been a priority this year has been, can we grow anything? What will grow? But certainly, you know, as we go on and as we develop more and more crops, then certainly that will become an interesting issue and something we will do. And, you know, if you'd like to feed in information on that front, it would be very much welcomed.
Again, in part of and the response to people listening at home, if you've got suggestions, do feel able to either email the Civic Trust, or if you know Althea's email address, invoice, money on the mind, email her directly. But if you email me, I'll make sure that suggestions and hints certainly reach Althea and the team. We have Chris McClory, please.
I don't know a lot about this, but when you said that you were going to chop down the willow, my heart went a bit, because I remember going to an apothecary's garden in Norway millions of years ago, and it was the willow that really attracted me, and it was used for so many things, obviously, in those days, for making the baskets and for your protection against puppets and things. And I thought you know, glowing.
Yeah. Okay, perhaps
we have from Chris McClory a question. She said her heart sank when she heard that willows were going to be uprooted and removed, and related rather a nice visit to, where was it, Chris?
To an apothecary's garden in Norway.
The apothecary's garden in Norway. So Althea, tell us what about these willows that might have to go.
Okay, I should have said that they aren't weeping willows, they're goat willows. And as you will know, goat willows are not exactly endangered. I don't like the idea really of removing them, but I can't see any other, if we do go ahead with this idea for a pond, I can't see that having them in the middle of the pond wouldn't just drain the pond straight away, because as you know, they're very thirsty plants. We do need materials to build our arches, to build our structures for things to grow up. And there is a very obvious source of the material to do that. So if we can source that locally on our plot, it would make a lot of sense.
And Chris McClory's fed back again, if you couldn't hear that at home, that we do have a Wilmslow artist who makes wonderful sculptures from willow. So we've got alternative uses. So maybe a heart won't sink quite so much, Chris.
Yes, I mean, that would be lovely. Maybe we need some sculptured rabbits. Try not
I was just going to add to that that composting, I think, would be the answer, and you could use that wood for so many different things.
I mean, it's only 3 trees.
You must come up and have a look, and I'll show you. It's difficult to describe. I don't think coppicing would stop them soaking up the water. I mean, they're going to drink the pond. So if you want your pond, I don't think you can have willows growing in the bottom of it. Sorry? But then I can't have, well, perhaps I can have the coppice bit, yes. Possibly. As I say, it's all very much in the air at the moment, because it's not even clear that we will be able to do this. So, you know, if we don't get the various permissions, it won't happen. So I don't think we're proposing to do anything that's too dreadful. Because as part of the tree group myself, I wouldn't favour cutting trees down in any way, unless there was some greater benefit.
So we've had there a bit of a discussion about coppicing and the effect on whether the trees would still suck up the moisture. And Althea was very quick to point that as part of the tree group, she certainly isn't poacher turned gamekeeper or vice versa. So that's good. How are the questions rolling from Bridget?
Could you explain exactly where it is again? I wasn't quite sure.
Althea, can we have another explanation? I know where it is, but I've lived near it, so...
You know what a cow lane is? And that was mentioned. I think, cow lane.
No, it wasn't cow lane. No, it's land lane is on this land lane. Althea, you just, please, have another go. Yeah.
Okay, you know the roundabout on the bypass next to the high school?
Yeah, yeah.
You turn right there towards Prestbury.
Yeah.
And to the south is the Land Lane allotment site. It's about in the middle of the road, that road, before you come to the Prestbury roundabout. So between those two roundabouts.
Right, thank you.
And there is a footpath sign at the far side of the allotments where you go down and walk, you mentioned the path, and look over it in principle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the old footpath from Land Lane that used to take you by the allotments and eventually out onto the Huff walked past this lovely little forest. Now, we've got just one question at the moment from our wonderful audience on Zoom, very patient because it's not functioned quite as we intended, but perhaps a little bit better than last time. How do we generally control weeds rather than simply splatting them with chemicals?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. The first thing about it is recognizing when it is a weed. If it's a useful plant, not in the wrong place, then is it a weed? But there are things like, well, we have thistles, we have an awful lot of thistles, we have an awful lot of brambles that want to come back, and we have nettles. And I'm afraid we just dig them up, cut them off, chop them off, keep chopping them off, I'm afraid. Definitely no chemicals. There's no chemicals as a rule.
Patient pruning, uplifting, mulching, but definitely not chemicals. Yeah. And our enthusiastic gardener.
I'm going to make a radical suggestion.
Yes.
That you forget the word weed, because they're all plants. The question is whether they're useful to you or not.
Exactly.
And I would suggest you have so much more interesting gardening if you just leave anything growing unless you've got something to replace it with. So if it's going to flower, it's going to, some insect is going to find it and find it useful. So unless you've got truly invasive weeds, which we all have like groundwater, but you can eat groundnut and put that in salads and things. So they have uses too. So why make all the trouble and worry about whether it's just a plant? So think about whether you will enjoy that plant, and having Welsh poppies in your garden is a wonderful thing. So enjoy your weeds.
I wish those at home could hear all that well, because it's a marvellous argument to love your weeds. If you enjoy them and they're not causing you any trouble, do enjoy them and let them grow. I think that's a simple answer, summary of your point.
Absolutely, and that's absolutely in the philosophy of the forest garden, which is why we've got nettles this high.
Things like, I'm sorry, what's about things like Himalayan balsam or giant ogweed?
Well, we've just heard the dreaded Himalayan balsam mentioned. I don't think there is any in that area, but correct me if I'm wrong.
There isn't any. There isn't any Himalayan balsam. There was a question about Himalayan balsam in that area at the moment. But Himalayan balsam is a wonderful late flower for bees. It's valuable. I would not be destroying it. I would very much be with Anthony here, and I would say, leave it be and enjoy it.
And put it in your salads as well. That's the other thing. It's good in salads.
Yes.
Himalayan balsam is good in salads.
Yeah.
Really?
So eat it. The answer is eat it.
My wife wants to know.
Yeah.
My wife wants to know: does it disguise the flavour of arsenic? How are we doing on questions from the audience, Helen?
This is perhaps more to do with planning than horticulture, but I think the impact it could have on the forest garden is relevant. So my query is, what is the status of the fields adjacent to the forest garden? I can remember a long time ago it was a proposal that it become the new waste disposal tip from Wilmslow. Of course, that never happened, but I have no idea what its status is now.
We've got somebody here who might be able to answer this.
Larta can probably say. The question is about the adjacent land, which was at one time threatened to be used as the local replacement tip when Newgate closed. And Larsa, do you want to answer that?
I don't know.
Well, I'm just giving people a chance at listening to somebody else's voice rather than mine. It is known as protected, but it's only protected for future development if and when we've used all the green belts. So there is, at a very remote future, possibility that it could be removed and be subject to future development. Christopher, do you think that's a correct observation? This is the I think from the strategic local plan, that area was.
Yes, but I was going to say it's now classified on the map as recreational area, and I know Cheshire is very loath to put any development on any recreational area, so it may stay. It's more likely to stay green. But we are trying to find out exactly what the long-term
It is curious because there's no signage, is there? And there are no public footpaths across there, to my knowledge.
There is a path.
Is it a legal public footpath? I'm not sure it is.
I think it might be.
But
we will.
Again, for the people at home, and do put your hand up if you've got any answer on this. The discussion is whether there is a public right of way across the land, off-land lane adjacent to the Prestbury Spur. And I think, frankly, the answer is yes, it's been maintained. And I hate to admit it, but on the very rare occasions I tried to do cross-country running at the grammar school, that was part of the run. So unless it's been lost, it is still a footpath, technically. Look, Ray's smiling at that. Was that the thought of me doing a cross-country run? Barry, Westmacott.
Sure. I think if we're referring to the field, which is immediately to the south of the Prestbury roundabout, that goes up to the allotments.
Yes.
The field was levelled by Cheshire County Council. It is occupied by rabbits and moles, and I walked across it yesterday, and the dogs walking on there, and that's as far as I know. I didn't actually know it was going to be for waste disposal. I thought the library or supermarket was going to be placed there because it did convenience for roads, but that has no doubt disappeared into the farming trade.
Well, for those at home that probably couldn't hear Barry's response there, Barry Westmacott, he's walked across the field and he can confirm the presence of rabbits. There is still all sorts of conjecture what the land might have been, but we're pretty sure that there is public access and people are certainly using it for dog walking. And of course, it was at one time infested by travellers who didn't leave it very nice. So it's had a little bit of checkered history. We've wandered off the subject tonight. What I'd like to do, I would like to do a couple of things. I would like to ask Pippa to just say a few words. And whilst you're saying your few words, Pippa, it gives you an opportunity to mention tomorrow night's Zoom-only meeting with Chris Widger, I think it is, going from memory. And over to you. And if you can come over, I think you're probably best to come and sit where I am and talk to the audience and give someone... Oh, John had his hand up. John, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you unmute? No, you unmute.
Okay,
John.
okay. Can you hear me okay?
Go on.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I would like to say a huge thank you to Althea for a superb presentation and a great exposition of the principles of permaculture, which I never really understood until this evening. So thank you so much for that and for the wonderful work that you're doing. I think it's absolutely brilliant. One specific thing that clearly is part of the permaculture garden is the notion of climbers. And I know that hops grow really well in quite waterlogged ground because I've seen them doing that in Askham Bog in Yorkshire. So I think hops are quite a good idea, as long as we've got someone on hand to actually use them to make some beer at the end of the summer. So maybe Anthony could help us with that. I also wanted to add something about the importance really of this wider stretch of countryside between the bypass and Alderley Edge. It's a really important area. It's one of the most important pieces of greenbelt in the North Cheshire Greenbelt because it protects the integrity of Wilmslow on the one hand and Alderley Edge on the other as settlements. And I think the prospect of development is pretty remote, even with Cheshire East as the council. Secondly, in the landscape character assessment for this area, which is called the Chona landscape because of Chona Farm in the middle of it, our neighbourhood plan recommended joint working between Alderley Edge Parish Council and Wilmslow Town Council to first of all regularise and establish a really good footpath network, because it's interesting, we've had a debate about whether some of these rights of way really exist or whether they're temporary and or informal rather. And so that's an important issue. And secondly, if you look at the distribution of trees across Wilmslow, including the built up area and its surrounding countryside, this piece of countryside has the lowest tree cover in all of Wilmslow, and that includes the town centre. So there's clearly a big tree deficit. And thirdly, there's a lot of biodiversity there, but there are great biodiversity opportunities, and that includes the potential to make much more of the old marl pits and the ponds that are in that area. So Althea's thoughts about ponds are quite important because there are a whole series of ponds in the area. They all have their amphibian populations, and these populations overlap to form a metapopulation. So when you're conserving them, they're like lights blinking on and off. So we want to keep the lights on and keep the ponds going. So Alderley Edge and Wilmslow have formed a joint working group, which is going to be looking at how to sustain the landscape, how to promote and establish the footpath network, which is a shared recreational amenity between our two communities, how to improve the tree cover and how to increase biodiversity. And we hope that that group is going to get going in the autumn. So I think that's really quite good news and complements very nicely the kind of things that Althea is doing. And I think that one visit that would be very good, which would kind of inspire the people who are coming together to begin that work, would be actually to have a visit to Althea's forest garden, because that would show just what can be achieved at the smaller scale, and then think about how on earth do we roll that out at the scale. Please excuse me, everyone, for not being with you physically. I'd much prefer to be with you, and I regret that I'm not, but it's been great to input. Thank you very much, Althea, for a wonderful presentation.
And thank you, John, for that wonderful update. And do please, between you, arrange that visit by the Alderley and Wilmslow liaison group. That's absolutely fantastic. Pippa, would you like to take my chair? Do whatever you want, as long as you want.
I'm honoured.
Just speak into the mic. Everybody at home should hear you as well.
Lovely. Well, first of all, a big thank you to you, Althea. This talk starts our Wilmslow Festival of Nature series of talks. If you don't know about the Festival of Nature, there are some leaflets on the table over there. But we've got tomorrow evening at 7:30. We're doing a Zoom talk with Chris Widger, who you may know from the National Trust, who is giving a talk about people planting in Wilmslow. So that's all about tree planting, and that's 7:30 tomorrow evening. And then the following Wednesday, we have Paul Nolan from the Mersey Forest, who's giving a talk about trees in Manchester and the Mersey Forest. And thanks to John, Cheshire East is now seen as part of the Mersey Forest. So that's going to be really interesting. So that's next Wednesday. Zoom, I'm afraid so. And then the following week, we have Dr. Anna Gilchrist talking about Lindo Moss, again on the Zoom talk on the Wednesday evening. And the week after that, we have Dr. Francis Hill talking about zero carbon and home heating. So we've got some great talks as well as lots of other activities. You just book into the Wilmslow Festival of Nature website, you click on tickets, and it will come down with the tickets. Everything's free, of course, so so just book onto the activities, and we'd love to see you. Just coming back to Althea's talk, I've just started reading a really interesting book written by a philosopher from Oxford about planning for the future, and saying that mankind is now at a pivotal point where what we do now could have massive implications for the future. We can do what we need to do what we ought to do in terms of looking after the planet, and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, those people who will never know us, will say a big thank you to us. If we don't, there may be no grandchildren or great-grandchildren left alive. So this is a really important opportunity for us, and it's a massive responsibility to help us to plan for the future and think about the generations we'll never know. In Liège in Belgium, there are community gardens surrounding the city, so that all of the fruit and vegetables eaten by the children in their school meals are grown locally. Couldn't Wilmslow be a bit more like Liège? Transition Wilmslow now has 4 gardens. In Wilmslow, we have the Community Market Garden down at the Children's Centre in Wilmslow, at Oakenclough, which has 2 big polytunnels and is growing lots of food. Many volunteers go along there, and food is being produced for the Hope Food Bank and also for the volunteers and the community cafe at Oakenclough. We've got a little garden called the Secret Garden in Lacey Green, where people are trying out different methods of growing. And for a very long time, we've had a lovely garden in the Temp in Gravel Lane with raised beds and orchards. And we encourage anybody to come and help us. And at the Temp in particular, we have brownies and cubs and beavers and people like that coming along to grow. So, and we're always keen to get volunteers. So thank you, Althea, for a beautiful talk. You and Peter have worked so hard over the last 2 years to set up this garden, and it looks incredible. And it's been great fun to join you occasionally as a volunteer. It's been absolutely wonderful. So Althea's talk has shown us a different way of growing and a really optimistic and beautiful vision of an investment for the future. So thank you, Althea, for a lovely talk.
And thank you all for joining us here this evening. I'll try and do that. It doesn't really work for the people at home, but maybe that's okay. Thank you, and I endorse, of course, the thanks of everyone to you, Althea. I can't resist the plug for the Wilmslow Civic Trust's next standalone meeting, which is back here. It's audience only, no headaches over Zoom, and we have our very own Ray Acton coming back to talk to us on, and forgive me, I've forgotten the iron workers. James Smithies, yet another character from Wilmslow's past that Ray will bring to life. And that is on, let me get the right date in, October the 5th of October. That's back here, 5th of October. Thank you all. Thanks those at home for bearing with us with a bit of an echo and troubles there. Safe journeys, and look forward to seeing you at many of these wonderful Festival of Nature events, and back here for the Civic Trust on the 5th of October. Thank you all, and Althea, thank you once again. Good night, everyone at home. Take care.